My name is Catherine, and thank you for joining us on another Encore excursion. Today we're in Rosenberg, Texas, and we're meeting with Larry Callis, who's the founder of the Black Cowboy Museum.
Howdy, folks. My name is Larry Callis, and I'm the founder and CEO of the Black Cowboy Museum. I'm going to tell you why I talk like I do. I used to be a country and western singer. George Strait's manager was my manager. You ever heard of Clint Black? That was my band back in the 80s. I lost my voice. And when I lost my voice, I lost my band and I lost my manager. Yeah, but I'm a Christian first and I'm a cowboy second. I know when God closes one door, he opens up another one. And he's opened this museum wide open for me. I opened this museum in 2017. And since I've opened it, I've had over 140 buses come here. And when the virus came, when Corona came, it slowed down. But I'm still open, and I'm doing well. Before I lost my voice, I played for George Bush Sr., Bob Lanier, the mayor of Houston, Lee Brown. I've also played for Kathy Whitmire. I played for Sylvester Turner. I didn't get to take a picture with him. I played for Miss Ann Richards, the governor of Texas. I've opened for Selena. I opened for Travis Tritt. I opened for Emilio and people like that. Johnny Rodriguez, Roy Head, Emilio. I even played with John Wayne's daughter. She called me from California, asking me for my band to back her up in the 80s. Okay, my picture went for $205,000. A girl from Katy drew my picture when I was working at the George Ranch. I was the lead cowboy. And this picture, this is not a drawing. I mean, this is not a picture, it's a drawing. It went for $205,000. But they sold 3,000 copies for $300 a piece. My picture won first place. But like I say, I'm a Christian person. It was all God. Out of 300,000 people putting a picture in Texas, my picture went first. That's got to be God. Okay, when people come to my museum, they're going to see something and hear something they've never seen. Here's one thing I can guarantee you've never seen. You've seen the marshal, the sheriff, the Texas Ranger, but have you ever seen this one? It says, Plantation Police, Runaway Slave Patrol, 1858. Now this is the badge that started the rest of these badges. These are the cowboys from the Jones Ranch from the 1820s. Now, people don't really know where cowboys came from. The word cowboy came from slaves. That a houseboy, a yard boy, and somebody worked the cows, he was called a cowboy. And that's where the word cowboy came from, right here in Fort Bend County. It came from this ranch. It was called the Jones Ranch. Now it's called the George Ranch. You see this guy in the middle, the white guy? He was called a cowhand. He refused to be called a cowboy because he knew the word cowboy came from slaves. So he didn't want you call a white man in the 1800s a cowboy. He said, I'm not your boy. I'm a cowhand or a cowman or a cow puncher. He refused to be called a cowboy until these cowboys in Hollywood started calling themselves cowboys. When they called themselves cowboys, they were imitating the black cowboys here in Texas. See, when they drove cattle from here to Kansas, they had nothing but black cowboys doing that. They didn't have white cowboys back in the day. Like I say, they didn't want to do that kind of work. It was like picking cotton. It was a slave job. So they would ride and do their work to take cattle from here to Kansas. I'm going to tell you a little bit about me. This picture or this paper from the New York Times is from September 2019. A girl came here and wrote an article about me, and she also wrote a book that just came out this week. Her name is Sarah Knorr. She's one of the best writers in New York. She was up for the Pulitzer Prize in 2016, and she won second place for the Pulitzer Prize. But she wrote about this museum. Last June, June the 16th, 2020, I was on the front page of the New York Times. They did a story on me, and it's on Instagram. You can find it on my Instagram. Now, I'm going to get back into the Cowboys. All right, this is a saddle from the 1800s, 1872. This is a woman's saddle from Waco, Texas. This is a saddle from the 1850s. This was a saddle that was designed and built for the military. But the military got it from Spain. In 700, the Moorish Africans attacked Spain, and they were riding these horses and the saddles. When they attacked Spain, they took over Spain for 800 years. And when they did that, Spain saw they were riding horses, like these horses in the desert. So they wanted these horses. So they traded for these horses, and they took them back to Spain and had one of the biggest breedings ever in the world. They had some of the best horses in the world. But when they were in Africa and they went down into the desert to collect these horses, they saw these Watusis that the Africans were working in the desert. Spain didn't know how these Watusis could live in the desert. They found out later that these big horns was just like a hump on a camel's back. It stored water up in there. So they wanted these Watusis to mix with the cows, so their cows wouldn't get that hot. They didn't know about the horns until way later. So they bred their cows to the Watusis, and they came up with the Longhorns. We know Christopher Columbus brought the horses over here in 1492 on his first trip. And when he did, he landed in Mexico where it was hot. So he wanted to bring the Longhorns. He came back his second trip in 1493. He brought the Longhorns over here. And the Longhorns started escaping and coming to Texas, where the grass was this tall and the trees was forever, and they could hide in the woods. And so they thrived here. But in 1865, they wanted to take these Longhorns to Kansas. But the slave owner didn't know how to get the cows out of the woods. The slaves knew how to get them out of the woods. Back in 1865, they told their master to let them go around the back of the plantation with pots and pans. They had their hunting dogs, and they ran their cows out of the woods with the pots and pans, and about 50 men running the cows out. Then they had these black cowboys that was free. They had them sitting out there by the woods waiting on the cows to come out. When the cows came out, they knew what to do. It was something they learned in Africa. When they had these Watusis in Africa, they would take them and lead them with their ring in their nose, and the rest of the cattle would follow. So they knew if they ran up to the longhorns, they could turn the front one and they'd follow. So they ran up to the front one when they got out of the woods and trying to get into prayer and run off. They would ride and circle them and keep them circling. They were so wild that the only people that could work these cows were expert horsemen. And they were experts. They rode around these cows 3 or 4 times in the open, and the cows got tired. And when they got tired, they just stood there and looked. Back in 1865, they didn't have barbed wire. They didn't have fence. So they had to keep about 300 or 400 cows in a circle. Guess who you had to sit out there for those cows? It was the black cowboys. The white cowboys would stay at home, and they didn't want to be out there. They had to sit out there for 2 to 3 weeks until they rounded up enough cows to take to Kansas. They needed at least 1,500 or 2,000 to make the trip to Kansas. Guess who sit out there for 2 or 3 weeks till they gathered up enough cows to take to Kansas? It was the black cowboys. All right, you see this guy right here? This is my cousin, Tex Williams. He was the first black to make an all-white rodeo in Texas. He didn't just make it, he won it. In 1967, Tex Williams won the all-around championship. Guess who the second black to make the state finals in the state of Texas? If you guess me, you're right. Yes, I didn't want to toot my own horn, but yes, I did. In 1971, I made the state finals. I didn't win it, but I made the state finals while riding his chaps. All right, this is in the final state finals, 1971. Larry Callis, right here in the bareback riding. I made the state finals in 1971. That was back when blacks really couldn't ride in the white rodeos. But I got in this rodeo because I worked for the biggest stock producer in the state of Texas. His name was Sloan Williams from Hungerford, Texas. This is me riding bulls. That's me roping calves. And that's me falling off a bareback horse in the finals. This is my dad. He was a real good calf roper and a real good cowboy. One of the best in Texas. The best was Tex Williams' dad. That's a big Preacher Williams, and that's a little Preacher Williams. That's my dad's brother. All right, this is Tex Williams. This is my cousin. He was the first black to make the state finals, and he won it in 1867. That's him in the middle. This is his buckle he won. State champion, Hallisville, Texas, 1967, Tex Williams. State champion, Hallisville, Texas, 1968, Tex Williams. When Tex went to a white rodeo in the 60s, they wouldn't let people with this color in. But Tex was a little bit light complected, so they let him in. And when they did, they didn't know how good he was, and they didn't know what he was. He looked Hispanic, or he looked Indian, but they let him in. But they didn't know how good he was. In 1964, Tex was riding when he was 15 years old in the all-black rodeos against people that were 20, 30, 40 years old. He even rode against some of the best in the world. Murtis Dykeman, Bailey Prairie Kid, Willie Thomas, James Thomas. He rode against some of the best. He was beating them. In 1964, Tex Williams was the champion of the Southwest National Colored Association. 1965, Tex was the champion again. In 66, he was the champion again. Then he got the nerve to get in the all-white rodeo. And when he did, he went through the front gate. They let him in. Back in 67, we used to have to go to the back of the rodeo arena. But Tex went in the front. Tex told him he wanted to ride. And he looked at him. They said, "What's your name?" He said, "Tex Williams." That's not a black person's name. So they let him in. He was so good, when he got on his bareback horse, he came out and laying back and looking straight up at the sky. And he come out and started spurting. Never looked at the horse. People jumped up in the stand, started clapping. 5 seconds into the ride, Tex's hat blew off. Tex had nappy hair. They found out he was black. They went from clapping to boo, boo. But the judges saw how good he was. They judged him fair. And he won. He won the bareback riding, the saddle bronc riding, the bull riding, and he won the steer dogging. So nobody could beat him because he did all 5 or 6 sports. He roped kids too. But this was his best sports: steer dogging, saddle bronc, bareback, and bull riding. Tex Williams on a white horse, and that's me on a heel horse. That was a year ago at a rodeo in East Bernard. And we were roping practicing. This is Willie Thomas and James Thomas. They were born on the George Ranch in the 1930s. Those 2 brothers became some of the best cowboys in the state of Texas, but they couldn't win the championship because they had to ride against, and they couldn't get in the big rodeos. Now, Willie was the first person to get in an all-pro rodeo in 1950-something. And when he did, he rode after the rodeo was over. They let him ride, but after the rodeo was over and they put him on the bull that had never been ridden. Guess what? Willie rode the bull. It was a guy from the newspaper there in San Antonio. He put it in there that this bull named Yellow Fever got rode. And people said, "Why didn't we see that? We went to that rodeo." They were so upset. They got in touch with the PRCA and a Pro Rodeo Association. And they complained so much that they say whenever a black man ride after the rodeo, 2 whites are going to have to ride. So they made that rule, and that's what made them start letting us ride. But when you have all white judges and you're a black person, you still don't have a chance to win. That's what they were saying about this man right here. He was the first black to get to the finals. His name was Murtis Dykeman. And when he made the finals, he never could win. And he always wondered. He asked a white friend, he said, "How can I win world champion?" He said, "You're going to have to turn white." He tells it in this Texas Monthly. But he's a good friend of mine. I know him well. And most of these cowboys you see up here, I know them all because I grew up with them. My dad worked for Sloan Williams. He was a big stock producer. And we went to every rodeo in the state of Texas for 10 or 15 years. That's how I knew all the black cowboys at the black rodeos, and I knew all the white cowboys at the white rodeos. Okay, this is Willie Thomas. He's from right here in Fort Bend County. He was born on the George Ranch. That's his brother, James Thomas. He was born on the George Ranch too in the 1930s. And they both became some of the best cowboys in the state of Texas, despite they couldn't ride in some of the white rodeos. But they became some of the champions. Now, the best bull rider to me, this is my own personal belief, Clinton Worth Jr. from Houston, Texas, was probably the best bull rider in the world at one time. But he couldn't prove it. He was back in the 50s and 60s. And I watched the best ride. I watched the white guys ride. I watched the black guys ride. That man was one of the best. But he never could prove it. Okay, when I opened this museum, this was the first saddle I collected. There's a guy named Bailey Pratt Keith. He was from Bailey Pratt, Texas. He used to come to the black rodeos in the 50s and 60s, and he had this saddle he rode. And he was kind of flashy. He wore with a tie and a white shirt. And this was Bailey Pratt Keith. This is him at 18. He's 82 years old now. And he was riding until he was about 40, 50 years old. And he donated this saddle to me. This is the second saddle I got donated to me when a guy from El Campo, Texas named Grady Allen, he was the best left-handed roper in the state of Texas. And he saw me at a restaurant. He came up to me. He said, they called my daddy Poogie back in the day, and they called me Little Poogie because I was always with him. He walked up to me. I was older, a lot older when I opened this museum. I hadn't opened it yet. He came up to me in a restaurant. He said, "Hey, Little Poogie, I hear you opening up a black cowboy museum." I said, "Yes, sir, I am." He said, "Can I be in it?" Because he's white, he didn't know if he could be in my museum or not. I said, "Of course you can." He said, "I have a saddle in El Campo, Texas. You're going to have to come and get it. It's up in the attic." And it was in July. So I went to his house and got this saddle. It says, Grady Allen, 1954. I was 2 years old when he won this saddle. He donated it to me last year. When he came to my opening, he brought his daughter, or his daughter brought him. He can't drive anymore. His daughter's named Kathy Allen. She was a world champion barrel racer in 2000. All right, this is a Spanish friend of mine. He's 80-something now. His name's Jesse Gonzalez. He was a champion steer roper around here. And Jesse, when he was 5 years old, used to ride this saddle. And he came to my museum. He asked me if he could put it in his museum. I told him yes. This is my cousin's saddle, Willie Boone. He was a champion steer wrestler. And this is his saddle. His grandson brought me this saddle a year ago. And I'm very proud of it because I knew him when he was a younger man. I was like 5 or 6 years old, but that was my cousin, Willie Boone. Hey, this is a carving of a slave. They brought 2 slaves to Fort Bend County. One was a woman and one was a young man. When they brought him here, they split him up. And the young man knew he wouldn't ever see his mom again. So he carved a face from a tree. And how he did it was, He asked the master for a knife. He wouldn't give him a knife. He wouldn't give him a hatchet. So he told him, go out there and cut the wood with an axe. So he carved it, the likeness of his mom, with an axe. They said the way he carved it, he had to put it on the ground, and he was always barefooted. He would put his toes on top of here, and he would carve it from up here with an axe. And how I got it, I had a guy working for me. He would come in and clean up. And he loved antiques. He loved history. He was from the other side of the tracks, right here in Rosenberg. He used to sit at this woman's house, and she had this statue in her front parlor. And she told him all about it, who carved it, and everything. Then when she died, she had married a new person, a new man, and this disappeared. My friend, he was like 5 or 6 years old. He's 50-something now. And he didn't know what happened to it. So he hadn't seen this in 50 years. When they cleaned out this house last year, people went up in the attic and took this and threw it out in the trash. And he saw it in the trash, and he said, I know what that is. And he brought it to me. Isn't that something? I guess I was meant to get it. It's carved from black walnut. It's real heavy. It's black walnut. It's over. It was carved back in the 1850s, 1860s. All right, these are my grandpa's boots. In 1950, he got these boots. They were made by Don Quixote from Mexico. And my grandpa used to wear these boots when I was a little bitty kid. I think I remember 3 to 4 years old. And I would lay down and look at these eagles. And I wanted me a pair of cowboy boots so bad. My mom finally bought me a pair when I was 5 years old. And they were red with doves on them. But I thought they were eagles. Just like my grandpa's boots. He didn't work in them. He played guitar. And he also sang in church. And he played guitar in church, and he wore those boots, and he always wore his pants inside his boots so people could see his boots. And my dad kept them and gave them to me before he passed away. Have you ever heard of the Lone Ranger? Did you know the real Lone Ranger was black? He was born a slave in 1838. His name was Bass Reeves. When he turned 15, he hit his master. He knocked him out. And when he knocked him out, he knew that was sudden death. So he jumped on the master's horse, and he rode to Oklahoma from Texas. He got in with the Indians. When he got in with the Indians, they taught him how to fight. They taught him how to shoot. They taught him how to ride. They taught him how to track. They taught him all of Oklahoma. They taught him all of Texas. As long as he was with the Indians, he was free. Then in 1865, he went to Oklahoma because the slaves were free. He went to Oklahoma to be a U.S. Marshal. He went to the hanging judge, Judge Parker. And when he got with Judge Parker, he said, I want to be a U.S. Marshal. Judge Parker said, you have to know how to read and write to be a U.S. Marshal. He said, I can't do either one. He said, but I got a good memory. He said, okay, I want you to go get these 5 people. He named each one of them. He said, you have 2 months to get them. You can bring them back dead or alive. He had them in 3 weeks. He had all of them alive, pulling them on a horse and taking them to Judge Parker. They made him a U.S. Marshal. He captured 3,000 convicts in his lifetime. And when he did, people started singing about him. They started writing stories about him. One guy got on the radio and said, I'm going to tell you the story of the Lone Ranger. Now, back in 1933, they didn't have TV. They just had a radio. The guy got on the radio and said, I'm going to tell you the story of the Lone Ranger. And he'd do this. And people thought it was a horse in the radio. They would sit there and listen. Man, they loved the Lone Ranger. Every Saturday night at 6 o'clock in the afternoon, the Lone Ranger would come on. And they'd sit there and listen. Somebody finally called in and said, hey, who was the Lone Ranger? Was he a real person? The guy didn't know any better. He said, yeah, he was a black man. Oh, he had thousands of phone calls saying they weren't going to listen to the radio station anymore. He said, why? He said, because you said the Lone Ranger was a black man. He said, no, I didn't say it was a black man. I say he wore a black mask. So when they put him on TV, they knew they wasn't going to accept the black man as a Lone Ranger. So they put him as he was a white man with a black mask. Isn't that something? You know, when Bass Reeves caught all the bad guys, he's never been shot. He's never been wounded. And when he captured 33,000 bad guys, nobody could shoot him or kill him. He's never been wounded. Do you know when they went to his house, after he passed away, he was 90-something, they went to his house to collect this jacket. They went in his house and picked it off the rack and opened it up. It had bullet holes on the side. He never got shot, but a lot of people tried to shoot him. He was a Christian man. When he captured his convicts, he would put them in a wagon, and he would pray to them. He would tell them about the Bible and doing the right thing. He was a good Christian person. And to me, that's what God kept him from getting shot or wounded. 3,000, can you imagine that? Nobody's even done a fraction of what he's done.
Thank you for joining us on another Encore excursion. We look forward to seeing you at our next exciting destination.